Welcome to In Touch with Officer Dawn and Ray the DA. I'm your host, Jenna McNeil. With the end of the year approaching, Ray takes a look at some interesting statistics from 2012 related to crime, homicide, and drug use. A particularly interesting problem that has arisen this year is the use of heroin and its involvement in overdoses. While drug overdoses are not usually considered homicide-related deaths, there are some cases in which charges have been placed against the fatal drug's supplier. Ray and Officer Dawn discuss some of these cases. Ray wraps up this week's show with this helpful piece of information. During the holidays, Wednesdays are the most likely day that property crime occurs. So be sure to keep your doors and windows locked throughout the week. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
Welcome to In Touch Crime Beat. I'm Officer Don with Fayette Commonwealth's Attorney Ray Larson.
Out of jail, okay? Don't mess up.
And those are the people, those repeat offenders, the ones that go to prison. And
I say we're the #1 rated radio show in the whole country.
I'm Officer Don with Fayette Commonwealth.
Welcome to the second part of In Touch. This is Crime Beat. I'm Officer Don with Fayette Commonwealth's Attorney Ray Larson. Ray, you've got some stats there, but you're going to make these things interesting, I can just tell you. You want to start with the stats, or we're going to start with the accolades for the guys on that case you were talking about? What do you want to do?
No, statistics are. See, I've been in radio a long time, Officer Don, and I know statistics are lousy for radio, and you haven't learned that yet. But
well, you were talking. Were you going to address the? You were talking about the murder rate. You were talking about OD, drug overdoses. That's
what I want to talk about is the scariest thing that's going on in Lexington right now, and that is the drug overdose business. I want you to understand this. So far this year, in 2012, we've had 14 homicides, traditional homicides. Somebody shoots somebody, somebody beats somebody to death.
14. Is that a high number for Lexington, or is that about right?
That's about where we are every year. Probably between 14 and 16 or 17 a year. We've had a couple of years where we've spiked.
I mean, like in '94, we had in the 20s. I remember that.
86 we had. You will remember that. You were in junior high then. But in 1986, we had 26 homicides, and then we had the same number again sometime in the 90s.
I think it was 94. It was a bad year.
But typically, we have somewhere between 14, 16, and 17. So this year, we're on 14 right now through November. Now, what about the vehicle fatalities, deaths in car crashes, that sort of thing? Well, we've had 18 so far this year.
Is that up or down?
Well, I think that's probably about the average. It just seems like we have them all the time, but that's 18. Now, what about fatal overdoses? What would you guess?
Well, honestly, I wouldn't have had any idea. I would have put them around 25 or 26. You were telling me the number is much higher than that this year, but I don't know how that compares.
56. 56. That's far more than the combination of vehicular homicides and or vehicular fatalities and traditional homicides. It's more than almost twice as many. Now, the thing that's this information, I got to give credit to the people that put this information together. Gary Ginn, the Fayette County coroner, and one of his deputies, Shay Titlow, put this information together along with Danny Page, who is a detective with the narcotics unit, and they just did it for a year, and then they gave the information to Chief Ronnie Baston, and Ronnie said, is it possible to go back 10 years and let's see what's going on with this stuff? So Gary Ginn and Shay Titlow and Danny Page put together sort of a. They just went back looking at these things, and for example, they went back to 2002. There were 26 overdose deaths were reported from a combination of narcotics. None involved heroin. 2003, there were 35 overdoses, deaths, and none were related to heroin. In 2004, 40 overdose deaths, and no cases involved heroin. In 2005, 36, no heroin. In 2006, 39, no heroin. 2007, there were 53 overdoses, deaths. One was involved in heroin. In 2008, 29 ODs, deaths. 4 were related to heroin. 2009, there were 44, and 3 were involved heroin. In 2010, 49 overdose deaths, 1 involved heroin. 2011, 52 overdose deaths, and 5 were related to heroin. In 2012, so far this year, 56 overdose deaths, and 21 involved heroin, or about almost 40%. The average of the 21, the average age of the person who died from overdose was 38 years old. The youngest was 22, and the oldest was 60. This overdose, you don't hear about overdose deaths
On the news.
on the news. You just don't hear it.
Well, like suicides, people just, they don't really cover those either. So.
So this is now something very interesting going on. There was a woman who was prosecuted in London by the U.S. Attorney's Office in federal court. They prosecuted this woman for providing pills to a young woman who died from an overdose on prescription medication. That right there in the dope dealer's house. They charged her with dope dealing that resulted in a death, and she was sentenced to 27 years. And so the question now becomes, how do we go back up the chain? And it's very difficult, of course, as you would know. You're a former
I
detective.
don't ever remember successfully prosecuting someone for dealing someone drugs and it resulting in a death, even though we know that happens all the time. Somebody has to provide the drugs for them. Now, I have one case where...
Well, one of the problems, I'll tell you, the problem is the person that died is a willing participant.
Yes, that's right.
And that becomes an issue.
Tune into the following stations to hear the full episode.